Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, March 5th, 2015. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week, Rose Schweikhart from Superior Bathhouse Brewing in Hot Springs, Arkansas, joins us to talk about what it's like to brew in a national park with water that bubbles out of the ground almost hot enough to hit strike temperature. And John Palmer takes a look at Rose's water profile to give some advice on how to brew with it. If you're new to home brewing or would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. You can follow me on Twitter. My username is Basic Brewing, all one word. We have a Basic Brewing Radio and Basic Brewing Video page on Facebook at facebook.com/basicbrewing. We're on the Google Plus, too. Thanks again to everybody clicking on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. You know how that works. Whenever you think of Amazon shopping, go to our website first, basicbrewing.com. Click on the Amazon link on the right-hand side of the page. That'll take you to Amazon, where you'll shop as normal. It won't cost you any extra. The only difference is that you will be helping to support this show. We greatly, greatly appreciate your support. We also have associate links for Brew Your Own magazine and the American Homebrewers Association on our site as well. You can find our Basic Brewing iPhone app on iTunes, our Android app on Amazon.com. We have a Windows phone app. We're on the BlackBerry podcast directory, and we're on the Stitcher app as well. If you want to put a tip in our tip jar, some coinage in our guitar case, you can go to basicbrewing.com/support. And thanks to everybody who's done so already. Let's take a quick look into the mailbag. Matt from Milwaukee writes, listening to your most recent podcast on blonde ales, I noted that you favorited the 1099 Whitbread yeast. In my experience, SO4 is a great dry alternative, and also the Whitbread strain. Y Yeast lists the attenuation of 1099 as 68 to 72%, and Fermentis lists SO4 at 72 to 75%. Matt says, English milds that I've made with dry SO4 have great malt flavor, some residual sugar, and brilliant clarity. My guess is you already have SO4 in your armory. Time for an experiment. Indeed. Thanks, Matt. I've used the SO4 yeast in the past and found it fun to work with. It's very flocculent, and it does well in malty beers. And it would be a fun experiment to do a split batch and put the SO4 against the 1099 to see what differences there are. In fact, I think that's a really fun thing to do, really fun idea. Okay, we talked for a long time, Rose and John and I, so let's get right into it. Hot Springs, Arkansas is my hometown, and so I was very excited to hear that a brewery was opening downtown in a bathhouse on national park property that's been empty for many years. Since the Superior Bathhouse Brewery is using hot spring water to brew beer, I thought it was a great time to bring in John Palmer for the show. John has literally written the book on water along with Colin Kaminsky. That's Water, a Comprehensive Guide for Brewers. So I asked John to take a look at the hot spring water profile and talk to Rose Schweikhart about how to work with it. Well, Rose Schweikhart, welcome to Basic Brewing Radio.
Hello, and thank you.
And John Palmer, welcome back to Basic Brewing Radio. It's been a while.
Yeah, thank you, James. It's good to be here.
Every time I see you at the Homebrewers Conference, we say, let's get together and do a show. And, I've always been looking for a hook to bring you on. And I think we found the hook because this is a kind of an interesting situation.
It is.
With Rose and the Bathhouse.
Yeah.
And this is kind of near and dear to my heart because Hot Springs is my hometown. And I was born just down the street from the brewery there. So I'd like to sort of give some background on where you are, Rose, and Hot Springs in general. It's the oldest national reservation, and it was the first land set aside for protection by the federal government, and that was done in 1832. And I read on Wikipedia that Hot Springs was a national reservation 40 years before Yellowstone was a national park. So it's the smallest national park in the system. It was known in its heyday as the American Spa. People came from all over to bathe in the waters. And during Prohibition, there were things going on around there
A little bit, yep.
that were a little less savory. And gangsters like Al Capone came down there, and famous people came into town to perform at these casinos and clubs. And in fact, there was open illegal casino gambling in Hot Springs until the state finally shut it down in 1967. My dad tells stories about, the state police would come to, quote unquote, raid the casinos, and miraculously, all the casino equipment would be gone when they got there. So,
yes, there's a colorful history of this town.
Yeah, and there's
sure.
Your Bathhouse, Superior Bathhouse, is one of several in what they call Bathhouse Row. But after casino gambling left, and after people got hot tubs at their own homes and things like that, the hot waters weren't as enticing for people to come to town, and so one by one the bathhouses closed. But now we're seeing where businesses like the brewery are coming into these old bathhouses and breathing new life into them, and it's a wonderful thing because they're beautiful buildings and there's a lot of history down there. And it's nice that that history can be preserved through using the bathhouses in different purposes. So, Rose, give us some background. How did you come to open a brewery, and how did you get interested in the Superior Bathhouse?
Okay, sure. Well, in 2011, I learned that I may be moving to Hot Springs with my former spouse. Had a job opportunity here, and I've been homebrewing pretty seriously. I think a lot of people start out with extract, and then they find out about a mini mash, so they're doing that with the extract, and then you move up to all grain, and like, hey, we're making pretty good beer. And at the proposition of moving to Hot Springs, Arkansas, where I had learned about the famous hot spring water, the natural thought process, whether or not it was a good idea, was, hey, is anyone brewing beer with the hot spring water? Wouldn't that be cool? So just kind of on that whim, it really was a whim, I emailed the national park, the Hot Springs National Park, and asked that very question, what are the chances of commercially brewing beer, with the hot spring water? And I didn't expect too serious of a response to that. But to my surprise, I got a response back within a few hours from the superintendent herself. And she said, let me tell you about the Superior Bathhouse, basically.
Wow.
It was an idea that the national park was open to because of the leasing program that you just described. A little bit to add to your history a bit, the Superior Bathhouse was the last bathhouse to actually close its doors to bathing, with the exception of the Buckstaff, which has been continually operating for over 100 years. They never closed. The Superior was the second one that was still holding on in 1983. Finally closed, like you said. The economy wasn't supporting 8 bathhouses as it had been during its heyday in the teens and 20s. Into the 40s through Prohibition, and then, like you said, things got slow. So there's the Superior. It had been closed for 30 years, and the bathhouses became, through the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, they became very kind of in disrepair. They were doing minimal work to stabilize them, but it was a very costly project. So Hot Springs National Park and the National Park Service went to Congress, U.S. Congress, and said, we need money to stabilize these buildings. And what we're going to do is stabilize them, do some huge work to make them lease ready, they called it. So they wanted to get these buildings to a state where they're not so bad that private enterprise, like myself, could not come in and continue, bring them all the way to an open, usable business. And actually, my understanding is it is a groundbreaking program within the National Park Service of allowing private businesses to rent a bathhouse, lease a bathhouse. Okay, so back to my project. That's with that email, with that response from the national park that said, "Yeah, let me show you the bathhouse." I began the process, and I just passed my 4-year anniversary of sending that email. So it's been a 4-year process. Basically, I had to put together a business plan. Of course, I had to go to banks and try to get money for the business plan. I had to go through a pretty rigorous historic review process. We are individually listed on the National Historic Register, so any change to the building needs to be go by certain historic preservation standards. All that has been it's tedious, but we've gotten through it, no problem. About 2 years ago, we signed the lease. So it took 2 years from idea to signing of a document. It's a 55-year lease.
Oh wow!
So I essentially own this building for tax and accounting purposes, but I still am under my landlords are the U.S. Department of the Interior.
Now it's got to be the only brewery in a national park, isn't it?
We are the only brewery in a national park. Yes.
And how was the building? I mean, you would think that a bathhouse, which is covered in tile and is designed to handle water, you would think that it would lend itself to being a brewery. Did it?
I actually think so, yes. I'm actually standing in my brewery right now. I have tile walls about halfway up the wall. That's been handy. We have tile floors that this room had 35 bathtubs in it, in little individual stalls, that kind of thing. So the tubs are gone. And actually all the plumbing had been removed. We had to re-plumb it, but we were able to put in floor drains and a lot of water outlets, both hot and cold and hot thermal spring water, for making beer. So I do think it lends itself pretty well. Plus it's a beautiful old structure.
Yeah, it is. It's really cool.
That sounds lovely.
Yeah. Now the water is what's interesting to us today. Back when I was a kid, the visitor center at the national park had a cross section of a pipe that was originally, I think it was like a 2-inch pipe, and there were so many minerals deposited in the pipe over years that the opening of the pipe had closed down to just a fraction of its original size. So periodically, it's kind of like hardening of the arteries, So every now and then they would have to replace the pipes because there was so much, I don't know if it was calcification, but there was so much mineral deposit in the pipes. So talk about the water. I mean, as I understand it, you said you've got one of the hot springs right in your building?
Yeah, I do. Okay, there are 47, I believe, different hot springs that come to the surface out of part of a geological fissure right on the base of a hillside, the base of Hot Spring Mountain, it's called. And Bathhouse Row backs up to that mountain, and that's not a coincidence. Originally, the springs would just kind of come to the surface, and they would make outdoor springs with little wooden enclosures around them. I mean, this is in the 1800s, and there's people bathing in the springs that are just trickling up to the surface, and then into a creek, which flowed down what is now Central Avenue to that creek is still there. It's under the street, and actually, I believe part of the creek is adjacent to the wall of my basement, very within feet of the wall of my basement. That's cool. So there's 47 springs they're capped now, so none of them come to the surface. They opened one the other day, and I looked inside. I wasn't sure what to expect, but it was kind of a square, about a 3-by-3 foot concrete square going down into the ground with some sand, what looked like sand at the bottom of it, and just kind of water seeping upwards very slowly. And it flows through a pipe to a collection system. So they aggregate the production of all 47 of these springs into a central stream. Here's where it's most important for me. From a business perspective, they test the water for safety to make sure it's a safe, potable water source. So I have a environmentally approved water source which allows me to make beer with it. That is great.
And Mother Nature helps you hit your strike water temperature, right? Because it's comes out of the ground at about 140 degrees Fahrenheit or 60 C.
Yeah, we hit. It's in time of year. It certainly depends. Certainly helps. But when I fill up my my kettle to heat or strike water, about 303 gallons. It ends up about 142, maybe 138. So yeah, that definitely is helping our brew day for sure. And also, it's actually very handy to have hot water and hoses, that kind of thing for cleaning. It's nice to clean with hot water. It's that sugar dissolves a little better with hot water, in my opinion.
Now, what kind of
that helps.
How have you approached the water chemistry, and what styles have you been brewing with the water so far?
Well, I need to get a little philosophical first. People ask that. Even non-brewing people ask that. And there's a myth, or there's kind of there's a story around hot springs that our water has, these healing properties. There are people who swear by it. They will come to our jug fountains and fill up jugs and take them home, and they only drink that water because it's so healthy. That's so, there's kind of this mystique about the water. And I think that's kind of cool. But I tell people, what's magic about the water for me as a brewery owner is, well, you pointed it out first, the heat is great in the process. But the chemistry, I've found that we can adjust the water fairly easily using, basically what we're about to talk about. I see the water as a bit of a blank slate for whatever style I'd like to use. It just takes a little bit of homework to do it. However, I will say that there's 2 beers that we brew without doing any changes to the water chemistry, except slight alkalinity adjustment of the sparge water. But we brew a Kolsch, which is a pretty light German-style ale, and we do just a classic Hefeweizen, also German-style beer. We have found that especially the lower hop styles, like those 2, we use pearl hops. The less hop styles turn out great with the hot spring water as is. And to me, it was important to find a couple styles like that because, what a cool thing to say that this is the beer produced by this hot spring water without turning it into Burton-on-Trent aquifer, for example. So that's part of my philosophy here is, no, the water is not magical. It's not the magic beer water. But, let me show off a couple styles where you can taste that spring water in the pint glass, in the final beer. In my opinion, I can taste some of the qualities of the spring water in the final beer. And that's cool. That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, my wife and I visited. We were in Hot Springs this past weekend, and we visited down there, and we wound up taking home a growler of the Hefeweizens. It's good. Now let's bring John into the equation. If you want to follow along at home, if you go to Wikipedia and look up Hot Springs National Park, down at the bottom of the page, it has a chart with the chemical profile of the water. But John, what are we looking at here when you look at the numbers?
Well, we're looking at really pretty typical water for most of continental United States in terms of the the hardness and alkalinity. These are pretty common numbers. Hardness or the calcium content is around 47 to 50. Magnesium is fairly low, around 5. And those are common numbers. You'll see anywhere from 40 to 70 across the country typically, if you're looking at a groundwater source. The alkalinity is also pretty common. It's 130, according to this. That's the bicarbonate, which would make the total alkalinity a little different. I think around, I've forgotten the conversion. I believe it's like 120, 110. But that's a pretty common value. It makes it more difficult to brew pale styles because of the high alkalinity. And so you need some help generally from acids or acidified malt to bring your mash pH down to a more useful level. You get better beer clarity with a little lower pH than this would typically give you with a base malt only mash. For your styles, Rose, I think you mentioned that you do some acidification of your sparge water, and that makes perfect sense. And I think that's the way most any brewer would treat this water.
So what?
Sorry. Go ahead.
No, let me get out of the way. This is a part in the conversation where I'm in danger of showing off my ignorance. So, so yeah, go ahead, Rose.
Well, I was just going to comment that in my observation, which has been brewing, test batch after test batch on 10-gallon batches before we were brewing larger batches, that as soon as I got into hoppier beer, even a pale ale, I'm not talking 120 IBU Imperial IPA here, as soon as it gets a little bit hoppier, especially those British ale styles, even a stout, even a pale ale, I was getting an astringent flavor, kind of
okay.
As an aftertaste, like kind of after the hop bitterness is kind of cleared off your tongue. There was this bitter bite to it, and I found in future batches, as I started doing salt adjustments, basically hardening the water some, that seemed to help that situation quite a bit. And I was curious if you could comment about that.
Sure.
If that makes sense. If that makes sense, if I'm describing it right.
Yes.
Is there? So what might be the explanation for that?
Well, the relatively high alkalinity, and we're saying the total alkalinity of this water is around 120. The bicarbonate level is around 130. Ideally, you would calculate the residual alkalinity of this water, that is the balance of the hardness to the alkalinity. Mm-hmm. And there's, you use Brewer's Friend and other software to calculate that, and it'll give you a value for this water of about, what's that number? 76.
I'm playing along here at home with your spreadsheet.
Yeah, it comes out to about 76. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is according to data that myself and Kai Troyster, among others, have generated. We would estimate that would raise the mash pH of a base malt only mash by about 1/10. So if you would mash in with base malt only, you could expect to get a pH of about 5.7. With this water, you could expect that mash in pH to rise to 5.8. When you start getting to 5.8, 5.9, and 6, you start extracting more of the tannins and silicates from the grain husks during the sparge especially. And that's where you're probably picking up that little bit of astringency on the finish of the beer, is you're getting a little bit more of those tannins and so on. Now, one interesting property of this hot springs water is that it has a silica value of 53, which is, again, kind of to be expected in a kind of a hot springs groundwater source. 50 is what I would call medium. Generally, brewers recommend that, in the brewing texts like Practical Brewer and so on, recommend that silica values be 25 or less to avoid, silica deposits on pipes as well as, flavor issues. In boilers, you would typically, in a heating boiler, boiler water composition, you would typically dump the water and replenish it when silica levels get up to about 100 ppm. So you're right in the middle there, and I think that's another not issue, but it's another consideration with brewing with this water is that you have these medium high silica values to contend with in terms of your plumbing and so on.
Sure. Well, I've noticed. I have a theory about this. When they're sending these samples out for testing, they're probably taking small amounts out of a large stream, that kind of thing. Well, I'm at the end of the line. So my hot spring water comes into the building in about a 4-inch pipe off of who knows how big of a pipe, which travels down to a hotel, which also uses the water. And when I fill my hot liquor tank, for example, or our kettle to do some water heating, there's visible crud. And it's interesting because we run it for we run it for about 10 minutes before we start brewing, just to get any stuff that might have settled in the pipes out of the way. We run it very vigorously, and also to make sure it's as hot as possible, because we want I don't want my steam boiler to create any single degree it has to. I want that heat from the hot spring water. Now we're getting into a money and a sustainability issue for sure. But even after we've run probably 200-300 gallons out of that pipe, we are still getting, like I said, visible crud. And my mineral deposits, sure, and probably some iron flakes. I mean, it's serious. And I make the assumption that by the time we've sparged, and by the time we've done our runoff we seem to be getting a pretty good mash bed. It's not we have a good runoff without too many grains getting past the grain bed into the kettle. That's good. And then we whirlpool, and we use conical fermenters, and I'm a highly flocculent yeast fan, so we have a really good settlement at the bottom of the tank. So I'm pretty sure that those actual pieces of crud, I'll call them, are not getting into the final beer. But my question for you is, how can those, like silica or maybe the iron deposits, heavy metals, how much of that does end up in the final beer, and what kind of flavors could I be getting from those?
Well, iron in particular has a bit of a metallic flavor, especially when you get up into, I believe it's 5 ppm and above, you can start tasting it. Manganese is another, and manganese wasn't tested in the government report, but that's another earth metal that could be in the water that would give a slight metallic taste or an earthy taste to the water. Turn it into a feature, but they're not necessarily detrimental, depending on what flavors you're trying to achieve in your beer. There are several methods for filtering these metals from the water. There are commercial ion exchange resins, water softening type treatments, green sand treatments that are very effective at taking out these heavier minerals. And they would also take out your calcium, but then you could always add that back to the water. So it's, I think there is a certain romance to using this water in a beer, and I wish I could taste them myself. You're right, it is a good kind of blank slate for a variety of styles. You by acidifying to reduce the alkalinity, you can make it a lower value of residual alkalinity that is appropriate for the pale beers, and by using it as is, it would make a very good brown ale or porter, that level of alkalinity. So you have a lot of potential for many different styles.
that's the kind of what I've always thought. I too enjoy the kind of romantic factor of, this is our water that's unique in the world, and how can we show it off through our beer, not trying to mask it, but at the same time, if we do need to make some adjustments so we don't have off flavors that are coming from the water. I also have a question. When I look at, when you look up, the brewing waters around the world, you look at, and we've all seen the lists, London water, Burton-on-Trent water, Düsseldorf water, Pilsen water, Brussels water. When I look at a lot of those waters, they seem to be, and I guess if you graph them, or if you look at the balance between the different chemicals, they seem to be either like fairly, super hard, like Burton-on-Trent, or super, super low, like Pilsen water, which is very, very low in anything.
Right.
And I feel like my numbers are fairly low. Like you said, the magnesium and the calcium are pretty low values, but that bicarbonate is kind of off the charts compared to the other ones.
Right.
And 130, it's kind of triple those other numbers, which seems like a weird ratio. And my understanding, I'm not a chemist at all. I'm a musician by training, and then a home brewer, still a home brewer. So my understanding was always that the addition of these salts, again, we're adding Epsom salt, we're adding baking soda or gypsum, or sometimes calcium chloride, depending on the target water I'm trying to hit. My understanding was always that bicarbonate would kind of be reacting with some of these other metals we're adding from the salt and precipitating out. Is that just a total lie? Or is that a total misunderstanding of?
No, that's it. It is true, but it's true under a certain set of conditions. Bicarbonate and carbonate chemistry gets pretty complicated in terms of the solubilities or the I've forgotten. AJ is going to kick my butt. What is that term?
Don't look for me to give you any help, John.
But anyway, what I'm trying to say is that you reach certain saturation levels with the carbonates and so on, where they will precipitate under some conditions and not under others. And so it's, unless you do a full computer analysis, it's kind of hard to say how much would precipitate. But what you can do, especially when looking at the international brewing cities and so on, is recognize that brewers will start out with that water, but they won't stay with that water. And I think you're a perfect example of this, is that, in brewing the Hefeweizen and the Kolsch, you're using this hot springs water, but you're acidifying the sparge to knock down some of that bicarbonate and remove some of that astringent taste in the finish. And this is what I call the dogma of virgin water, is that brewers look at these profiles and think, okay, I've got to brew with that profile to make that style of beer. But because we're brewers and because we've been brewing for, literally thousands of years, we've always adjusted our water. We've done it naturally with lime. We've done it by pre-boiling. We've done it by adding natural sources of salt. Yes, yes.
Exactly.
So your water is, like I said, we've said is pretty good. It's kind of nice, middle of the road, not outrageously high, like say some parts of North Dakota and Texas, but and not absurdly low like Pilsen. It's interesting to note that even the Pilsen brewers, they always added salts to their water to brew their Pilsner lagers. I have that straight from Dr. Ludwig Narcissus from Germany. He's like, when those styles were developed, Burtonization was new technology. It was all the rage in brewing. And even though you look at Pilsen water and think, it's this very pure source, they actually added salts such as calcium chloride to improve the water for brewing.
So
Absolutely.
Let me kind of tie this back to the homebrewer listening.
Yeah.
Rose, what was your approach, before we got John on the phone, of dealing with your water, or of trying to determine what styles it was appropriate for and how to adjust it to brew styles that it wasn't appropriate for?
Well, the first approach was just to use it without doing anything at all, just to see just to compare. I would maybe take the same recipe of stout. I keep saying stout because I love a stout. So we would brew a stout with just kind of city water, which has been kind of adjusted by the city, and it's not hot spring water. That was kind of for better or for worse, my control there, and then brew it with the hot water, and that's where I started to notice that, like I said, that astringency that comes out. So there was definitely some trial and error involved, and then we said, okay, well, it's time to play water chemistry, which I was and probably still am a complete novice at, but I'm starting to have practical applications to where I can actually taste the beer and go back and make adjustments next time we make the same recipe. So that's a scientific method in a not so scientific way, I guess. But so really that was the approach. And then started learning, okay, well, our water is pretty absurdly, it's 7.6 pH. So right there, I knew that was too high for sparging. We have to get that down. So started doing that, and then it became, certain regions of the world gravitated towards certain styles for some reasons. They could be cultural, but I'm sure the water contributed to that. So for making a British ale, I started looking into how I could make this water closer to London water or Burton-on-Trent water. And then it became, how close can I get it without throwing the balance of any two of the components completely out of whack, that kind of thing. I don't want the chloride to sulfide ratio. I didn't want that to get too out of whack,
right.
For example. So I learned there's only so far I can take it. I don't think I can get all the way to a Burton-on-Trent profile with my source water.
And you actually wouldn't want to.
Right, I probably wouldn't want to, exactly. So it's like, but I mean, the end, what are we trying to make in the end is delicious, tasty beer. So I'm just trying to work with it in a way that is giving me good results.
And you were using the water calculator on Brewer's Friend and John's spreadsheet, right?
Yeah. Actually, I actually started out using John's spreadsheet, so I just want to take a minute to comment that I'm kind of honored to be speaking to you, John, on this podcast. That's kind of cool. I've, of course, read your book as well. Oh. So I'm like, wow, I'm talking to this dude who got me interested in this at all, and that's amazing. And then, I just like the Brewer's Friend tool because it makes it it's easy to make changes and kind of send it, again, share it with people online. It's kind of a neat collaborative tool. I can send someone a link to that, and they can put in their own values and mess around with it, and it's fun. It's been great. I've had people ask questions on Facebook on how we use the water, and I've been able to send them a link to a copy of my exact numbers. And here you go. Have fun. I have local homebrewers ask about it all the time. So not that I make sure to point out first that I'm not an expert, though. So I'm not an expert, but this is kind of working. This is working so far, and we're still refining, but this seems to be working pretty well.
Yeah, and I have to brag on the stout. The stout is good, and while we were there, we had a taste of a special version of the stout that was, I believe, aged on oak and had cherries in it as well.
We actually did for Valentine's Day. We took about 20 gallons of our stout that was still in active fermentation and added tart cherries, about 20 pounds of tart cherry, so about a pound per gallon. And it really went crazy. There's not too much sugar in tart cherries, but the yeast definitely munched munched on the sugar from the cherries, and let that go for about 2 weeks. And then we added some plain brewed coffee, pretty strong coffee, right before we put it into kegs. So it was our Valentine's Day edition of our stout.
Yeah, and I think that was our favorite.
Well, thank you. The tart. I like how the tartness. I love acidic, anything acidic in general. So I'm glad you liked it.
So, what styles would you recommend, John? I mean, being a native of Hot Springs, I would like the idea of being as much of a purist as possible, with the water profile as it is, without changing it too much. So what does this water profile lend itself to?
Well, the high alkalinity lends itself to the use of higher acidity specialty malts. And actually, your highest acidity specialty malts are the dark caramels, like a Crystal 80, Crystal 120. Mm-hmm. When you go from the darkest crystal to roasting, such as a chocolate malt or a black malt, the acidity actually drops down. So there's kind of a balance between how much of a particular specialty malt you use and how acidic it is in terms of how much you actually contribute to the mash pH. So that's why a stout lends itself very well to this water as is, because the alkalinity of the water is able to balance against the roast malts and the amount of roast malts that you would have in a stout. Likewise, I think a brown ale or a red ale, a dark, or a porter would also work very well, because you have these high caramels that would also balance that alkalinity and help you bring the mash pH down to your target range.
That is really. Can we talk about brown ale for a minute, James? Do you mind if I hijack?
Go ahead.
Regarding brown ale.
Go ahead.
Brown ale question. Question me. I lived in Manchester, England for a year. I was going to school, and that's where I fell in love with. There's kind of the real ale movement going on right now, as you know, or it has been for 20 years. But I got to go to many, many pubs that had a lot of cask ales, a lot of beer engines from smaller breweries, and actually even bigger breweries would put out cask versions. And I fell in love with the brown ale. Of course, Sam Smith's Nut Brown is maybe one of the quintessential examples of that style.
Sure.
And these British brown ales, and I have found very, very few brown ales here in the States that I like as much as, let's just say, Sam Smith's Nut Brown, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think this is a water chemistry thing? Do you think this is a technique thing? Is it the Yorkshire squares they use? Is it their yeast? I mean, you know what I mean?
I believe it's probably a combination of all these factors. To paraphrase Dr. Michael Lewis, he told us one year at the CBC that anytime you change any factor in the brewing process, you have brewed a different beer. Absolutely. And I think that's a good guideline to have in the back of your head. So anytime you're trying to emulate another beer, unless you can copy it exactly, and even the mannerisms of the brewer, I think you need to expect to slightly miss the mark.
Sure.
But going back to the practical now, getting the same English malts that Sam Smith would be using would be probably the biggest step in the right direction. Mm-hmm. The water probably doesn't have a whole lot of impact on it other than establishing the right mash pH. Secondary would be kind of looking at the sulfate to chloride ratio and trying to dial that in so the hops and the hop varieties you use don't overpower that maltiness.
When you say dial it in, get closest to balance, to a 1-to-1 ratio, or would I go?
I think you need to kind of find that balance in brewing different batches and tasting it. I don't know what their water profile is off the top of my head. I'm not sure we could even find it because, like I say, many brewers adjust their water after it enters the brewery anyway.
Sure.
But yeah, something like a 1-to-1 sulfate to chloride, or even something like a 1/2-to-1 sulfate to chloride, somewhere for a brown ale, I would probably say 100 ppm of chloride and maybe 50 ppm sulfate would probably be a good target. Yeah.
Let's write that
more
down.
chloride than sulfate. Yeah. And that way you would accentuate the maltiness of the beer.
Right.
Yeah. Brown ale is a really wonderful style. I agree. And I think it would really lend itself well to the water you have. You may want to bump up the calcium and with calcium chloride, but otherwise, I think
that would help that other ratio too.
Yeah,
that would be inducing chlorine as well, chloride.
Yeah.
I've always had. Sorry, one more. I need to keep going down my brown ale thing for a minute, James. I always thought it would be very cool to do use under-modified British malts like Maris Otter as a base malt, and take just my hot spring water at the temperature that it comes out of my faucet, and do basically a low temperature step, and then bring that up through decoction to get up to the higher saccharification temperatures. But so I have this kind of mythical brown ale in mind where I, again, use the British malt, do a low temperature rest without even heating up strike water first, and then bringing it up with like a decoction thing. I think just talk about showing off the hot spring water, like we're using it right literally at its spring temperature. I'm curious to see if that would work.
That would give you a dough-in temperature of about like 135 or so, and which would be high protein rest, kind of low saccharification, and you'd bring up from there. You would definitely need to find a malt that had a lower degree of modification, somewhere a Kolbach index of say 38, 40 maximum, because any higher and you're going to really denature a lot of the head retention proteins and actually create haze in the beer. So that's one thing to watch out for. But yeah, it's a really neat idea to take it down that far. I don't know that you'd want to do a decoction with, or at least you would want to, if you did, you would want to save your specialty malts for later in the process, because
that way I'm not burnt. I'm not going to get those tannins out of the dark malt.
Right. Yeah. You want to keep the dark malts out of any boiling process. I did some steeping experiments last month where even with pH adjustments and so on, if I boiled roast grains, it just tasted like burnt food, burnt coffee. There was no getting away from it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It would be fun if through your experimentation you came up with your own style, Rose.
That one can dream. Yeah, that does sound wonderful. Actually.
I mean, you
hot thermal beer.
Yeah.
Thermal beer.
Slightly radioactive thermal beer.
I have an old brochure from the Superior Bathhouse, and they're advertising direct from spring to tub, thus retaining all radium gases. Of course, now my landlords, and they're awesome to work with, but they are the federal government, are very concerned about the radon levels in my building. So I've put a radon mitigation system involved here. But no, that's a great idea, James. I will call me in 10 years. I'll let you know if we're there yet.
Oh, well, my family's down there, so I'll be coming by often.
Oh, that's true. Awesome. Well, maybe, hey, if you want to collaborate on something, maybe we could come up with something.
Oh, that'd be fun.
With the lower mash step.
Yeah, that'd be a lot of fun.
That'd be kind of fun.
Yeah, you could play with the smaller batches again. You could go back to your 10-gallon pilot system, or even smaller, to do experimentation.
I do think that would work. Tomorrow we're actually doing a half size batch, a 3-barrel batch, and I'm going to put some of the conversation we had today into play. We're doing a Belgian dark ale with raisins. So,
ooh, that sounds good. Well,
I'll let you know.
Yeah. Well, Rose, good luck on the brewery. You've got a good start, and I look forward to tasting the results as it goes along. And John, thank you very much for your expertise. It's been fun having you on again.
Oh, pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you both. John, thank you for your time. Great to talk
welcome.
to you.
Thanks again to Rose and John. Of course, in addition to the Water Book, John is the author of How to Brew and can be heard on the Brewing Network as well, and is probably one of the nicer guys and smarter guys in home brewing. Rose has asked me to give our listeners a challenge. Rose wants to know what recipes you have made successfully using an initial strike temperature of around 140 degrees Fahrenheit or 60 C, because she'd like to use that hot water right out of the tap to start a mash without adding any extra heat at first. So, if you have a recipe that fits the bill, send it to me. If you have a recipe in your logbook or wherever you keep track of recipes, and you had to heat your initial strike temperature to around 143 or 140 degrees Fahrenheit or 60 C, let me know. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com, and please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Check out our support link where you can throw a couple of bucks into the tip jar by subscribing financially to our podcasts. Be sure to check out our DVDs, Extract Brewing and Partial Mashing, Stepping into All Grain, Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits. You can find them all on our site. You can check out our Basic Brewing shirts in the store as well. You can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order them online in our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We greatly appreciate the support. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are Wubbanub Tabby Kitten and Sonoran Spice Ghost Peppers, 2 ounces. Woo! Thanks again, everybody. Remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. We greatly appreciate your support. And, of course, don't forget you can also join the American Homebrewers Association and subscribe to Brew Your Own magazine through the associate links on basicbrewing.com. That's all until next time. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.